In today's video, we have the latest rumblings from around the NHL. Today, we take a look at the Vancouver Canucks, the Seattle Kraken, Toronto Maple Leafs, San Jose Sharks, Buffalo Sabres, and the Philadelphia Flyers. Plus, I want to discuss some comments made by Habs defenseman Arber Xhekaj in a recent interview. It was interesting to learn that he was actually almost a Toronto Maple Leaf instead of becoming a Hab. We'll discuss what we learned and all the rumors coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of things to take a look at here today. I'm going to go over the latest rumors from around the NHL, but first, I want to take a look at some comments made from Habs defenseman Arber Xhekaj that he made in a recent interview. He appeared on the Spit and Chicklets podcast, and there was some interesting stuff there. For one, we learned a bit about his path to the NHL, and obviously what was going down, like the process for him getting his contract and everything. And as much as he's a Montreal Canadian today, he's quite happy to be. It sounds like obviously that was his favorite team, but he was actually almost a Toronto Maple Leaf, and there was even the Florida Panthers were very much in the mix as well. The Toronto Maple Leafs were actually the very first NHL team to reach out and make an offer to Arber Xhekaj for a rookie contract. But before he signed it, he wanted to wait it out and see. It sounded like he was kind of hoping there would be other offers, than preferably Montreal. And eventually the phone did ring, and the Habs did come through with an offer. Before he was officially all signed, sealed, and delivered with Montreal, the Florida Panthers also came in and were interested as well. But by this point, he already had the offer from the Montreal Canadiens and was fully intending on proceeding with that. But obviously, Xhekaj is one of those kind of unicorn players in a way. Like, he was not really somebody who got a ton of fanfare, coming up through the ranks. Obviously, towards the end of his junior career, he started to kind of get noticed a little bit more, and certainly had an opportunity, that obviously when you're drafted, you kind of have more, less freedom, I guess, in a way. But at the same time, it's, nice to have that, that team kind of want your services, so to speak. So when you're an undrafted player, I'm sure in a lot of ways it's more stressful, but at the same time, you get more flexibility if it's looking good that you're going to get an opportunity, and there's multiple teams interested. But yeah, it would be very, very interesting here to see Xhekaj as a Maple Leaf instead of a Canadian, especially if he becomes a big part of that, rivalry over the years, because certainly, Montreal and Toronto have been in very different places. We obviously got to see, a playoff series in a unique playoff format a few years ago, which obviously he wasn't a part of yet. But, certainly as Montreal continues to go through their rebuild and be more competitive, it'd be fun to see the Canadian teams, whether it be, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Ottawa, etc. Those three Canadian teams that are all pretty close proximity, hopefully get some playoff games against each other to kind of, bring the intensity back to those rivalries, because they've all been pretty decent over the years, but they're certainly not quite as ramped up as they once were. So obviously, Xhekaj could certainly play a big part of that with Montreal. We know he's not afraid to drop the gloves and not afraid to throw some hits and kind of stir things up. So curious to hear a bit more about him and what led to him getting signed by the Montreal Canadiens. Now, as I mentioned, a variety of rumors I want to take a look at. Let's start with Vancouver. There's a variety of things there. We're going to take a look at a recent article just in the last 24 hours here from Thomas Drance and Rick Dollywall of The Athletic, talking about their goaltending stuff, Brock Besser, the Podkolzin trade, and a few other topics here. So certainly, with Thatcher Demko, there seems to be some more real legit concerns from what they're trying to do some digging and find out. They can't really get a clear-cut answer. Lots of silence around the organization around whether or not Demko actually had a surgical procedure or not this offseason. Of course, we know he suffered a fairly serious injury, was unable to play the rest of the way in the playoffs, and the last time he reportedly was on the ice skating was getting ready for Game 7 against the Edmonton Oilers. So if he hasn't been on the ice at all, that certainly does not sound very promising at all. Like I said, the reports in the last couple of days have emerged suggesting that he most likely would not be ready for the beginning of camp and most likely would not be in a position to play preseason games. But the word was from these reporters that the team was saying that they still were hopeful that he would be ready to start the season. And of course, now a lot of them are seem pretty doubtful that that's going to be the case. If you're going to miss camp and not play any preseason games, especially after having a fairly serious injury and not being on the ice all summer, that just seems very odd to me that you're not going to be ready to start the year. And to be honest, I mean, I'm no doctor. I don't have the doctor's reports, the medical reports, or anything of that. But if they're seriously shopping for goaltending help, which has been reported now for a few days, and it sounds like they're not just going after a tweener that's going to be a number 3, I do wonder how much time is possible for him to miss, and I do wonder just how serious of a situation this might be. Now, Dhaliwal and Drance kind of don't really get into a lot of their own thoughts or speculation on just that he's not going to be ready and they're looking for help. And Kevin Lankinen still appears to be the targeted goaltender. As I mentioned, they do have some options, such as him through free agency. They could look to make a trade, but right now, obviously, if you can get it without giving up assets, makes more sense. And Lankinen's played pretty decently for the Predators the past few years. Has 100 games of NHL experience now. The problem with that, though, is that he's got enough experience and played well enough that he should be able to demand a little bit more of a contract than league minimum. It's not going to get that 1 year $775, right? That's at the same time, at this point in the offseason, he's not signed. So you got to think he's going to lose a little bit of his leverage, and maybe that's why he's unsigned, is maybe he and his agent were looking for a little too much money, and other teams just found options that they were able to get that they felt to be comparable for less money. That wouldn't surprise me. That does happen sometimes. Players go into the offseason and think, they've played well and they've earned a shot at getting at least the same money or more. And sometimes it's not even that they're really wrong in that case. It just really, the market dictates a lot. And teams are always looking to save money. You got to remember, the players want to get every dollar they can. It's their livelihood. They have a limited time to earn this kind of money in their careers. And it's, the whole goal here is to maximize that, and it should be, right? From the team's perspective, they want to save every dollar they can so that they can put the best team together that they possibly can to try to be competitive and win and sell more tickets, and it's a business, so it can be tough to balance that from both sides, which is why you have collective bargaining and why sometimes those negotiations can be rather tough and hard to agree on. But in Lankinen's case, we don't know what the offer was, but the Canucks are believed to have made an offer this past week, and they're kind of waiting to see if he'll accept it or not. Clearly wasn't something he jumped at because, we don't have a deal here just yet. Now, the Canucks' new goalie coach also has a connection to Lankinen. They've worked together before, so that's encouraging too. So we will see. At this point, they're not linked to any other goaltenders, but if a guy like Lankinen, they obviously have Arthur Shelov's, I just I'm getting the impression here that maybe this is a little bit more serious than we might have been led to believe. But we'll have to wait and see. The team is probably not going to give much info on Demko. I would suggest probably till training camp. I'd be surprised if they come out, unless he ends up needing a surgery that he hasn't had yet or something, which we don't have any reason to know that that's anywhere remotely possible. So we'll see. Of course, they also talked a fair bit in the article about the Podkolzin trade, kind of what led to it. It's basically a lot of what I said, the similar type of thing in the Podkolzin trade video when it went down and he was traded to the Oilers. I had said that I just didn't see a spot in this Canucks lineup for him. I mean, he was inconsistent last year and spent a fair bit of time in the minors. And then, of course, they went out and they added more depth to the wings, just making it that much more challenging for him to earn a spot in training camp. It was already tough for him last year, and they really became a deeper team on both wings this offseason, adding Jake DeBrusk and, Daniel Sprong, and of course they were able to bring back Dakota Joshua, so at the end of the day, it's really hard to see him being at most the 13th forward, and it might be a scenario where, depending on their cap situation, they might need him to go down. They were concerned that they would lose him on waivers because he's no longer waivers exempt. So he would need waivers to go to the minors this year. They knew that he had a slim chance of making the team out of training camp, given what they've added. And it just made sense that they were thinking, oh, they're going to lose them for nothing. We might as well get something while we can now. They had an opportunity to get a mid-round pick from the fourth rounder from Edmonton, and they took the deal. So it makes sense. But obviously, he's still young. There's still lots to like about his makeup and his profile that he could hit somewhere else if given the opportunity. I think there's still a possibility that he kind of carve out a decent career. It's early to tell. Time will tell. But they certainly hope they didn't give up on somebody a little bit too soon in that case. That's for sure. Now, they also talked about Brock Boeser. Brock Boeser, of course, has been eligible for a contract extension since July 1st. He had a big year last year. Obviously, like I said, he had struggled for a couple of years before that. A lot of which I think was fair to say was a lot of off-ice stuff going on. Unfortunately, his father was quite sick, lost his dad. Just had a lot going on in his personal life, which I'm sure was difficult to play through, and I'm sure it was distracting for him. Could have had impacts on him, emotionally, mental health-wise, like all those things. Like, he's been pretty open about how a lot of that stuff has gone down. And, but after rebounding last year and getting a 40-goal season, you've finally seen a good version of Brock Boeser that the team and a lot of fans thought was there and just hadn't seen, at least at that level, in some time. But yet, so far, there's been absolutely no contract talks all summer that they can verify. So, obviously, at this point, the Canucks are not in a super big hurry to extend him. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean he's a goner. Obviously, I don't see a scenario really where they're going to likely move him this year. I mean, he's a big part of their team, scored a lot of goals. After last year's success, they're going to try to build upon that this year. They don't want to go backwards. Just because he's not signed, even if they had concerns about his next contract and whether or not they could afford him long term, and there very well could be, some concerns of what he's going to be looking for that way. Doesn't mean that they wouldn't keep him, and try all season to figure it out. So I don't really have any information from this article or otherwise to suggest that Boeser's any danger of being traded. But for somebody who had such a good year for them last year, it just seems a little weird to me that we're all the way deep into August now and that they've had at least no contract talks at all. You think I can see that there's no extension in place. There's lots of other players in the same boat that are even higher profile than him, i.e. Sidney Crosby, Leon Draisaitl. There's lots of guys out there that fit the bill, right? That the teams want to keep. They had great years, great number of years in some cases, and they're not done yet. But but in those cases, though, we know there was lots of conversations, and here to hear that it's all been very, very quiet, I just it's a different vibe and I'm mildly concerned. But again, no pressure points, and it's too early to tell. Maybe when training camp starts and they get more face-to-face time, maybe that will change. We'll see, but everything's been very, very quiet on the possibility of extending Brock Boeser. Now, of course, one of the Canuck rival teams, the Seattle Kraken, of course, just across the way, very close in proximity. Even though that rivalry is not really intensified as of yet, hopefully over time it will. But they're very, very, very tight to the cap now after that Matty Beniers 7-year extension that was completed here in the past couple of days. So there is some talk that they could certainly look to give themselves a little bit of cap flexibility and maybe move one of their pending unrestricted free agents. They certainly did some spending this offseason that was, I think, fair to say, uncharacteristic of Ron Francis. Not so much the Beniers deal. I do think that after the year he had, I was a little surprised to see the long-term big money deal. I thought they might go bridge just because there was regression last year. The numbers did not improve, but then again, a lot of the guys around him did as well. He wasn't the only one. And they clearly still believe in this young man to be a big part of the team's future. And I don't think that's, they shouldn't think that or anything. I think it's quite possible he will still be that. But it just, planted a seed of doubt that maybe the offensive numbers won't be quite as big long-term as they may have thought. You got to have those thoughts, I think, fair to say, when you see regression in their younger years especially. So, with all that said, there's been some talk about a couple of guys getting moved. It doesn't mean they both will be, but there's been some talk around defenseman Adam Larsson. He's in the final year of his contract. Brandon Tanev is another name that's out there. There was a lot of links to Tanev being linked to the Ottawa Senators in the very early part of the offseason. That never materialized. I do believe from what we had heard, it sounded like there were some conversations, but a lot of that was speculated because the Senators were one of the teams very interested in his brother Chris, and that they obviously could use some changes to their bottom six, and were considering bringing in Brandon as a way to lure the brother in to try to get both Tanevs to be Senators. Of course, we know Chris Tanev ended up having his rights traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs and signed there, and so that became not an option for them. Now, I don't know if that Brandon Tanev talk and rumors was only out there because of trying to get Chris interested in Ottawa. I'm not sure. Looking at the Senators' bottom six now, it wouldn't hurt them to have another experienced player, like a player of his stature, in that third or fourth line, especially in the fourth line. But problem is at this point, they don't have enough cap space to bring in a player of Tanev's magnitude. And if he's going to play in the fourth line, he's making $3.5 million, and that's too much money for a fourth liner. I can't see Seattle retaining money on him, so it's going to be tough to do. I mean, that's the only team that was previously linked to him. But if you look around the NHL, there's definitely teams out there that would probably want a player of his caliber. I don't think there'd be any shortage of interest. I do wonder, though, if it's $3.5 million, because most teams might want him to be a fourth-line player, and that might be too much money. So it's going to be tricky to do. But Adam Larsson, the right-shot defenseman, has been linked to some teams, including one of his former teams in the Edmonton Oilers. Now, I know he did not want to stay in Edmonton. Had the opportunity to go to Seattle during the expansion year, of course. He was one of the original members of the Kraken. And at this rate, I'm not sure how keen he would be to go back there. I know a lot has changed, though, with the team, a completely different regime, so I'm not really sure what his issues were, but the belief was he didn't really have any interest in staying there. But like I said, that was a few years ago. Things have changed for sure. But we know the Oilers are linked to a variety of right-shot defensemen. Larsson, though, I'm a little surprised to be one of them in a sense that he's making $4 million. And the belief is that they wanted somebody who was making less than Cody Ceci. And he made, less than Larsson. So unless Seattle retained money, it just wouldn't make sense. And I don't see that being a case. But I have seen Larsson's name out there. The Oilers are not the only team that's been linked to him. It seems like they've been linked to a lot of former Oilers. I've heard of Tyson Barrie going on a PTO. We've heard about maybe trading for Jeff Petrie, Justin Schultz. It's like a reunion of Oilers alumni here. I'm not sure how that's all going to come to be, because they've had a lot of right shot D over the years leave town that suddenly might not seem so bad to have at their disposal. But we'll see for Edmonton how that goes. But in Seattle's case, it does sound like Larsson could be available. But again, given where things are at, I don't think we're going to see an Adam Larsson trade anytime soon. I think that's more likely because I think Seattle will once again have a hard time getting into the playoffs. And if there's not looking like they're going to be a playoff team, then I can see him being a prime target at the deadline. And I think they might be able to get better value at that point. But we'll see. They're really tight to the cap, though, right now, and wouldn't be surprised if they made some sort of cost-cutting moves. Those are the main two names that are out there, but no guarantees. They're not really in a situation where they have to do something, so we'll see where that goes. In San Jose, Logan Couture, again, we know he's missed extensive time, and it's still not clear if he's going to be ready to play in camp or at the start of the year as well. Looking at their roster, you got to help but wonder here after getting goaltender Yaroslav Askarov in another move. They've suddenly become one of the more interesting teams with a great young prospect pool. And another name that's unsigned out there wanting to trade, and this is just speculation I've seen online, not necessarily from an NHL insider, more so from fans, just wondering if a reunion to his home state, at least, because it's not exactly where he grew up, but the home state of Nick Robertson in Toronto. We know that he has requested a trade. He's unsigned at this point, considering how deep it is into the offseason, and he has not caved and signed a contract with them. It doesn't sound like that's going to change, but you never know. But the only thing is, looking at the rosters of teams like the Sharks and even the Anaheim Ducks, because I know for some reason, because Robertson's a California player where he was born and raised, that a lot of people want to have him, a lot of rumors see him going there. And, if you look at the Sharks and the Ducks, like, they may not be, like, at this point, some of the league's top teams by any means, but they've made a lot of acquisitions over the last year or two, and there's not really a lot of room there, so I'm not really sure. I can see how both teams would make sense for him, but again, not sure what Toronto would want back. I kind of half wonder if Robertson does not change his stance here and won't sign. And if they do end up moving him, if they could find a deal maybe for another similar age young player coming back, ideally forward, because it's possible that if Robertson does stay in Toronto and does sign, that if he has a really good camp, that maybe he does make the Leafs kind of force their hand at having him in their lineup to start the year. And maybe it could be, something that the relationship changes and he ends up staying after all. But at the same time, at this point, Robertson's name is out there. I do wonder about Dallas as well. Problem with Dallas, because obviously the thing about Dallas is obviously his brother Jason plays there. Be cool to see the brothers reunited. They have $6.2 million in space. And if you're looking at their forward group, I kind of wonder, he'd probably have to compete with guys like Maverick Bourque, for example, for a roster spot, and that might be a challenge for him because I know the stars are real high on Bourque. Stan Coven had a real nice, spurt to a season last year, and he's going to be definitely a player to watch this year as well. So, I don't know if he could have a leg up on those guys. He's a bit older, but the problem there, though, is that they don't have Thomas Harley signed. So, yes, they have over $6 million in space, but Harley remains unsigned. The projections on a contract for Harley, if they go long-term, he's probably looking at around a 7x7 deal. Short-term, probably like 2 years, around like 4.25, something like that, 4.25, or somewhere in that 4 range. So if they end up doing a bridge deal, they'll still have space and they could bring in another forward to create some more competition and whatnot. Like I said, it could be fun just to see him have an opportunity to maybe play with his brother. But as around Robertson, though, like there's lots of talk of him going to all these different teams, mostly out west, but no concrete anything just yet. And there's still talk about Buffalo. I've seen another article today from the Bleacher Report suggesting that the Sabres are still looking to bolster their forward group, and again mentions Joel Farabee of the Philadelphia Flyers, who reportedly still continues to be a player that is available from Philly for the right offer. The Flyers have been relatively quiet this offseason. I put up the Flyers, our GM report card video earlier today, and really they focused on internal business only. They brought over Mitchkov, they got Konechny signed long-term, but they didn't really bring in anybody from the outside. They only took care of their own internal business. They didn't really lose a whole lot of players. They bought out Atkinson. Didn't bring back Mark Stahl, but there's really not a whole lot of change there in Philly. But Farabee's name has been out there as a potential player that they would be willing to move for the right price. The Sabres, I think it's been mentioned pretty well all summer too, that they would like to add another younger-ish forward, and they have not done so. That's no different than Montreal. They were, rumored and linked to making that type of move all summer, and finally we've seen it just a short time ago with Patrick Laine. So I'm not sure how aggressive Kevin Adams and the Sabres are being out there right now to add that player, but I can see a guy like Farabee fitting in quite well, playing maybe with a guy like Dylan Cousins, for example. So, again, no guarantees it happens, but, he's a player that's been out there for some time, and there's still new information popping up that the Sabres are interested. Doesn't mean they've made the right offer, and it doesn't mean Philly is eager to move them, so it's difficult to say the likelihood of it coming together. But, again, will the Sabres make a move? They really should. Looking at their roster, in all honesty, I think if they want to have a chance, looking at what Montreal has done, I think Montreal will be better this year. I can see Ottawa being better this year. I can even see Detroit maybe taking another step. So if they want to keep up with all those teams in the bottom half of that Atlantic Division, trying to catch teams like your Tampas and your Torontos, Boston, Floridas, I think they need to make another move or they're going to be in tough. And they could regress, actually, because of everybody else around them getting better. So if I were Kevin Adams, I would be looking to make a move. Farabee does make a lot of sense, but difficult to say if they can pull it off or if maybe there's a better deal out there that hasn't come through the rumor mill as of yet. We'll see. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.